In this video, we are breaking down the 5 players that you need to be trading away off your rosters before week 8 begins. The whole point of fantasy football is to have the best roster, and by trading away these players, you can upgrade your team heading into the fantasy postseason. And let's start with the Jacksonville Jaguars second-year running back, the former third-round pick, Tank Bigsby, who, look, this guy's been fantastic. All around great this season. I mean, any metric I pull up on Player Profiler, he's top 5 in yards created per touch. You can scroll up here, he's top 8 in yards per carry. Oh, let's scroll over to his explosive run rate. Right now, explosive runs, he's 3rd in overall broken tackle rate, juke rate, he's 7th in. So like everything I just mentioned, he's been a top 10 pure rusher on the season, borderline top 5. He's been amazing. And now he's coming off of his best game of the season, because in week 7 in London, according to Fantasy Life, he played 66% of the snaps in a game where Travis Etienne did not play, and he saw 68% of the team's carries. Now, if you just look at the backfield carries that the running back saw, he saw 74%, a season high. And this strong usage translated to a very good fantasy day. He had 118 rushing yards, a massive 26 touches in a nice matchup against the Patriots, multiple touchdowns, had a second touchdown kind of in garbage time, so he just got you a little bit of a bonus to go over 25 fantasy points, finish as a borderline top 5 fantasy running back for not the first time this season, but now that's the second time this year that he's been right around that top 5 mark on the week. So all of these are positives, and it might make you think, like, why is he in this trade away video? Well, his value is as high as it's going to get, because that past performance is great, but it's not going to predict his future performance. Because as recent as a few days ago, Doug Peterson came out and said Travis Etienne is still our running back 1 when healthy, and right now Travis Etienne is day-to-day. There's a chance he plays in week 8. Even if he misses, he'll probably be back by their next game in week 9. And even if Travis Etienne, look, he hasn't been good, he's not healthy, I still believe that Tank Bigsby will be highly involved. I don't think Etienne's just going to be this workhorse #1 running back once he's back. But I do believe that he will be involved, definitely as a pass catcher, and involved enough to really never see another 26 carry day out of Tank Bigsby. This probably starts to drop back down to 10 to 12 carries. And if that's the case, it's going to be really hard to have 26 fantasy points or anywhere near that in your performances moving forward, meaning that that was probably the best game you're going to see for a very long time, at least this year, from Bigsby. But that's not even the worst part about Bigsby's profile. Yes, he's going to have more competition when Etienne comes back, but there's more alarming issues here. Because so far in the season, Bigsby has just 1 catch. And yes, that 1 catch did go for 28 yards, so that's nice, but he has 1 catch on 2 targets this year. The guy's not a pass-catching running back, and that's a big problem, because in fantasy football, where plenty of leagues right now are half-point PPR or full-point PPR, if you don't catch passes, you're kind of useless most weeks. Because you become game script dependent. You have to be a favorite. You have to be leading in the second half, otherwise you come off the field. And this week, even though he's at home, he's a 3.5-point underdog against the Packers. This is a script where we can see him coming off the field a decent amount and getting nowhere near 26 touches, but instead getting like 10 to 12 carries and no targets, because again, he's not a pass-catching running back. Which is exactly what we saw in week 6 when he had to come off the field in a blowout loss, because look at this right here, just 27% of the snaps, only saw 41% of the rush attempts. You scroll over, just 12% of the routes run, because he's not a pass-catching running back, 0 targets in this game. And based on the way that the Jacksonville Jaguars defense is playing, giving up a lot of points, the offense being inconsistent, they're going to be trailing in a lot of games moving forward, meaning Bigsby's coming off the field. And just look at the upcoming schedule. Obviously, they're underdogs against the Packers. They're going to be underdogs on the road against the Eagles, good defensive line. They're going to be definitely underdogs against the Vikings, good defensive line. Underdogs on the road against the Lions for sure. Underdogs against the Texans. Like, they're going to be underdogs possibly in every single one of their remaining games, but definitely the next 4 or 5 weeks. Bigsby's going to have some poor performances in there. Now is the time to sell him. And you can sell him for a lot of good players. Like, he's my 80th ranked player overall right now. I think a lot of people view him much higher. Like, if we redrafted today, he's a 7th round pick. That's not terrible, but I think people are viewing this guy as like a top 24 running back rest of the season. No, he's not that. I would trade him 1-for-1 right now for Ladd McConkey. I would trade him 1-for-1 as we scroll up to different positions. Jackson Smith-Njigba, Tank Dell off a bad week. Same position if you could. You probably can't get it done, but Brian Robinson, it's tougher for these same position ones. But all those other wide receivers, I think you can get 1-for-1 deals done. Deontay Johnson, now with the news that Bryce Young's going to be starting, I'd rather have him even with that news. So I would try and trade away Tank Bigsby. And now we have to talk about Najee Harris. And I really want to start this with a positive about Najee Harris, because the dude has been fantastic the last 2 weeks. It's not like he's gotten lucky on one big run or this or that, or he's getting a lot of volume and producing like Kareem Hunt, who hasn't been good, but just getting a lot of volume. No, Najee's been really good. In week 6, you recall, he goes for over 120 total yards, finds the end zone, was highly efficient with multiple explosive runs of 10+ yards in this game. Then you go to week 7, his first game with Russell Wilson as quarterback, sees big volume, 21 carries, averages basically 5 yards per touch, gets another touchdown, another 19-point day. Now, the matchup against the Jets wasn't the most difficult, but definitely a more difficult one than the week before against the Raiders. And look, we can't blame him for taking advantage of weaker matchups. The Raiders are one of the worst run defenses in the league, and right now the Jets, since they haven't had Bryce Huff or Hassan Reddick, for most of the year, yeah, it's looked pretty bad on that defensive line as well, but he's taking advantage of good matchups. And now you look over the past 2 games, and Najee Harris leads the NFL with 7 explosive runs. And in his first 5 games, he had 0 explosive runs of 10+ yards. And in that first game with Russell Wilson, the team put up 37 points. We saw George Pickens come alive. Najee Harris, Russell Wilson looked great, especially on play action passing, completing 8 of 9 passes for 150 yards. He was looking fantastic. Like, if this continues moving forward, yeah, there's going to be a couple of more weeks during the season when you see a big Najee Harris performance, especially if Russ sustains drives and gets to the red zone. And then you look ahead to this week in week 8, and if Najee's on your roster, it looks good yet again. They're 6-point home favorites against the Giants, who the Giants currently have a bottom 3 run defense in the NFL. The Giants, as of this recording right now, are allowing the most rushing yards per play. So yeah, another great matchup for Najee Harris. I will admit that. And I believe that you can start him this week, but then you want to look to trade this guy. And maybe you don't even take the risk of him flopping this week in a good matchup like he did a couple weeks back against the Cowboys, and you just sell him right now because look, Jaylen Warren has been back now for 2 weeks, and Jaylen Warren is clearly getting healthier. In week 6, when he returned from a knee injury, he played just 34% of the snaps. But this past week, he sees 50% of the snaps. It was a absolute split backfield. He saw 34% of the rush attempts and the majority of the routes run. More on that in a second. That's important. So Jaylen Warren returned 2 weeks ago. This past week got a lot more usage, saw 15 opportunities. This was a split backfield. And now he's turning Najee Harris into this running back that when he doesn't score a touchdown for you is basically useless in all formats. Because there's no passing game usage right now for Najee Harris. Like, let's look at Najee Harris so far this season. We'll look at his targets right here. These are his targets per game. In week 1, he had 2 when Jaylen Warren was out there. Okay, Jaylen Warren gets hurt in week 2. Let's look at the games without Jaylen Warren. You're getting 5 targets, 6 targets, 2 targets. Now, what have you gotten these last couple of games? 1 target and 2 targets. So you're averaging about 1 to 1.5 targets per game with Jaylen Warren this year compared to 3.5 without him. That's a massive difference. So that's already bad. And then there's a chance that Cordarrelle Patterson gets more involved in this offense once he's back from his ankle injury. And remember, in week 4, Cordarrelle Patterson had 8 touches in the first quarter and a half, was playing ahead of Najee Harris, a healthy Najee Harris in that game, and was looking really good. He had in this game basically 62 yards on 8 touches, had a couple of explosive plays. We know Arthur Smith likes him. Patterson's on this team basically because Arthur Smith pulled him from Atlanta with him when they went out together. Free agency for Patterson, new coaching hire for Arthur Smith. So when I'm looking at the rest of the season rankings, Najee is my running back 90. He's barely in my top 100 players because he's in a split backfield that can turn into a 3-headed backfield on an offense that I'm still not all that excited about. He's not getting the passing game usage. So right now, I'm absolutely fine going out there and trading him for guys I mentioned earlier, Ladd McConkey. I mean, heck, if you can get some sort of deal done for Evan Ingram, who I believe is a borderline top 5 tight end rest of the season, I think that's interesting. Jordan Mason is probably one you can easily get done, or another Jordan and Jordan Addison right now. These are all deals I would be trading 1-for-1 Najee Harris, but yeah, more likely you're going to get some sort of package done. Now, that tool I was just showing you is my rest of season rankings, aka the trades tool, and it's available to you if you want it. 21,000 people just got access to it this week. And you can get access to it, the link in the description. You can see right here, it says how to get access. You just follow these 2 simple steps that will take you over to this page where it will show you 2 of our partners, either Underdog or Better you can sign up with, whichever one makes more sense for you. And the reason you want to sign up for them or go that route is because when you sign up with one of my partners this year, the 2 partners below, you get the Blueprint absolutely risk-free. Now, what does risk-free mean? It means it's a one-time payment of $10 when you sign up for the Fantasy Blueprint. That gets you that rest of season rankings tool, but also my waiver wire tiers, my rankings and projections per week, game-by-game matchup notes for every single fantasy relevant player. You get all of that for a one-time payment of $10, but if you don't make your fantasy playoffs for whatever reason, just reach out and you get your $10 right back, making this offer completely risk-free. So to get access to the tools that I use in all my league and over 21,000 other people are using for theirs, you can scan the QR code on the screen, click the link in the description below, take that info and smack around your competition with it. All right, this next one up is going to be Alvin Kamara, and this is going to be controversial. People, before they even listen to the video, are going to go into the comments and be like, Alvin Kamara, how can you trade Alvin Kamara, blah, 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 blah. Okay, listen up here, right? Listen up, everybody. I'm telling you right now, Alvin Kamara is a good running back. I'm telling you right now, he's been a great running back this season. Just how good has he been? Well, he's been a top 5 running back on the year, averaging over 20 fantasy points per game. His usage, his role in this offense is fantastic. You look at his carries and his targets right here, 16 carries per game, about 6 targets per game. That's 22 opportunities per game. Very few running backs are getting that workload. In terms of receiving game usage, number 1 in targets, number 1 in target share, number 1 in running back receptions. Again, for fantasy, he's been an absolute cheat code, a weapon for you. So that's an awesome role, and it's not one you're selling low on. When I put him in this video, it's so you can sell high and upgrade to a more stable asset in the future. Because there's a lot of concerns for Alvin Kamara. First off, his own health right now. He's dealing with a broken hand. The broken hand for a running back, how's that going to get better, right, while you're taking hits? And he's also dealing with broken ribs. So this is an aging running back who's now 29 years old. Age is already a concern for him, right? 29 years old, already dealing with 2 separate broken bones in his body as a running back, playing behind an atrocious offensive line. And that's not even to say that later on, as the season continues to wear on, we're only 7 weeks into the year, that he doesn't pick up more injuries. And there's a decent chance he could pick up some more injuries because the Saints offensive line ranks dead last in the NFL right now. Kamara continuously is getting hit behind the line of scrimmage. And when you're getting hit behind the line of scrimmage, one, you're not putting up fantasy production. It makes it even harder when you already have these injuries to break off long runs. We haven't seen a 20-plus yard run from Alvin Kamara Kamara in like 2 or 3 years. Like, you're just one more bad week away from Alvin Kamara missing 2 to 4+ weeks or going on IR, and I don't think you want that on your roster. But there's a lot of other concerns here. You have Derek Carr. He could be returning in a week or two, and I think that's good for the passing game, but overall right now, we're not sure if he's going to be fully healthy. He's still potentially going to miss 1 to 2 weeks. You scroll down to the overall offense, Rashid Shaheed, the guy who was getting you to the red zone often with big plays, which Alvin Kamara was cashing in for his 7 touchdowns this year, well, Rashid Shaheed is now out for the season. You have Chris Olave coming back from a concussion, but that's really it that defenses have to worry about in the secondary, and Chris Olave is not like this Justin Jefferson, Mike Evans, Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown receiver that defenses have to put all their attention in the secondary and leave a softer box. No, they're going to load the box against Kamara. And then one more thing, for what it's worth, I do think that this addition of Kendre Miller making his debut last week does matter. I don't think Kendre Miller is anywhere near taking away a starting job from Alvin Kamara. Let's get that straight. But the truth is, Kendre Miller looked good in his debut last week. He was averaging 5 yards per touch on his limited carries, and Kamara ranks 5th right now in snaps, playing 74% of the snaps. Based on the fact that he's already dealing with 2 injuries, based on the fact that he's seeing too big of a workload at 29 years old, I think the Saints coaches might say, hey, Kendre Miller looks good. Let's give him a few more snaps. And that's when you see Kamara's snap share drop from 74% to maybe 60%, to 65%, to some weeks 50%. And if that's the case, it's still good. He can still be a top 20, top 15, heck, even top 12 running back most weeks, but not this top 5 guy that you've been seeing to start the season. And that's where my concern for Kamara comes in. Again, I think he's fantastic. Literally, look at this. Rest of season, he's my number 13 overall ranked player. But if you can trade him 1-for-1 for Kenneth Walker right now, which I think you probably can, I'd do that. If you can trade him 1-for-1 for Kyren Williams, I'd do that. Malik Neighbors off a down week, I'd do that. Some sort of package deal for CeeDee Lamb, who's a top 6 player rest of season for me, I would do that. I think there's a lot of name value and a great red hot start, 7 touchdowns to the season for Kamara, that I think you can get a fair trade to a more stable asset for him. Now, I also want to talk about Javonte Williams, because believe it or not, I actually don't think he's a sell-away player right now, but I got a lot of questions, like big week for Javonte last week, right? Not only was it the best week of his career or his season, but also his career for Javonte Williams in week 7. But I want to break this down because I think we have to talk it through before we just sell high on him. In that game, yes, against a bad Saints defense that's allowing the most rushing yards per play, struggled to tackle in that game. You see 88 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, his first multi-touchdown game, 23 receiving yards. So the guy goes for 111 total yards, multiple touchdowns on a nice 17 touches, and he gets you 26 points. Like, this was great. You may be tempted to sell high on Javonte after this, but again, I'm telling you to hold on to him. Now, obviously, if you get a deal you can't turn down, then go ahead and do it, but odds are you won't. But here's the thing. Javonte Williams, these last 4 games, the usage has been great. He's playing 62% of the snaps, averaging 16.5 opportunities per game, and this right here is important. This number, 17%, is his target share. A 17% target share for a running back would rank 2nd in the NFL this year, only behind Alvin Kamara and right ahead of guys like Breece Hall. It's an elite role. And now this upcoming week, you're getting the best spot of the entire season for Javonte Williams. He's a 9.5-point favorite against the Carolina Panthers this season, who are allowing the 2nd most rushing yards per game, who now have Bryce Young back at quarterback. So odds are they're not going to have a great offense to keep up in games, which in the second half, the Broncos could be up by multiple scores, giving Javonte 20+ touches, and maybe he gets another 100 yards again. I mean, everybody's getting there against Carolina this year. This past week, Brian Robinson, in basically one half of football, goes for 71 yards and a touchdown. He only really played one half for the most part. The week before that, Bijan Robinson had his breakout game of the year. 25 points, multiple touchdowns, over 100 total yards. Everybody gets there against this team this season. And what's most encouraging for Javonte Williams, and a big reason why I don't want you to trade him away, is because his end of season playoff schedule is good. This is when you want to be starting him, when he's at home against the Colts in the fantasy playoffs, a Colts bottom 5 run defense, when he faces the Chargers, who just gave up 150 total yards last week. Their linebackers are struggling the past month of the season. They gave up all that yardage to James Conner. And then he gets the Bengals in the fantasy championship, who over the last week or two have looked a little bit better, but overall a bottom half of the league rush defense. So again, I'm going to tell you to hold Javonte. Now, if he has another big week and then you can start really selling him for some top 25 players rest of season, top 50 players rest of season and package deals, well then yeah, then we can start to talk about it. The next player we have to talk about, and maybe put some water on some of the fire that's going on around George Pickens right now and all the hype that's going on around him, is Pickens. Because in week 7, look, he had his first game with Russell Wilson and it went good. Not only did it go good, but we saw Pickens' best usage of the season. He ran 94% of the routes. That was a season high. A 36% target share in his first game with Russell Wilson. That was a season high. And what did it lead to? Well, it led to a really nice performance. We pull it up right here and you can see George Pickens, 9 targets, catches 5 of them, a couple of deep shots, 111 yards, and a touchdown in the red zone, back corner of the red zone. It looked fantastic. It was beautiful. It was awesome. And it was everything we wanted out of Russell Wilson's skill set to throw deep balls and George Pickens' ability to catch those with a nice catch radius. But we have to put some things into perspective, because recency bias is a hell of a drug. You saw this past week and you're just going to assume that that's always going to happen. It's not. It's probably not going to happen again this season, because look at this stat right here from Next Gen Stats. We can pull it up. Russell Wilson under center play action this past week in his debut was 8 of 9 for 150 yards under center. That is number 1 in his career, and that's also the most in Steelers QB history history during the Next Gen Stats era since 2016. So 8 years. In 8 years of tracking data, that was the most for a quarterback what the Steelers has ever done, and the record for Russell Wilson in terms of how efficient he was on play action passing, 8 of 9 for 150 yards. So this is the high point. Play action passing, that's important because it's an efficient pass in the NFL, usually leads to those deep targets for George Pickens. It's probably not going to get any better than it just did. Like, there's a decent chance that's the Russell Wilson ceiling performance. And let's be honest here, we know what Russell Wilson is at this point in his career, right? We've seen it for the past couple of seasons that he has not been the same guy that he was probably 6-7 years ago. I mean, in that game, he averaged 9.1 yards per attempt. Right before that, last season, 6.9, 7.3. These are at or below the league average, 60% completions, right? This is not the same player who can win with his legs, who can rely on his really talented supporting cast between an offensive line or multiple playmakers. He doesn't have that right now. He has one playmaker, and yes, that playmaker is George Pickens, but defenses know that as well. Like, you really think the defenses are going to be scared of Calvin Austin, an underneath guy, Van Jefferson, a guy who's just basically running wind sprints, Scotty Miller, who can't get on the field, the rookie Roman Wilson, who can't get on the field? No, they're going to know that George Pickens is the guy to take away, and in most weeks, even when they force him the ball, Russell Wilson is not going to complete 90% of his play action passes. And at the end of the day, what do the Pittsburgh Steelers want to do? They want to play fantastic defense, and then they want to run the ball nonstop 30 to 35 plus times a game. That doesn't benefit Pickens in the long term. No doubt about it, Pickens is a talented receiver. He's my number 57 player rest of season, but look at some of the guys that you can probably sneakily get for him. I think you can trade Jalen Waddle right now and get Jalen Waddle for Pickens before Tua returns. And when Waddle had one game with Tua this year, he had over 100 yards on 5 catches. That's the guy I'd be trying to go for. Maybe Chris Olave coming back from the concussion if you're looking at the same position. Across different positions, a package for James Conner, a 1-for-1 for Tony Pollard. I think these are situations that you can benefit from selling high on George Pickens after this big week. Now, before we get into this next receiver who's been honestly good for you, but it's time to sell him, 65% of you aren't subscribed to the channel. Just take 2 seconds. It's a gentleman's agreement on this channel. We shake on it right now. If you find the video helpful or entertaining, you just hit the subscribe button. It takes me like 6 to 8 hours to produce each of these videos, research them, get them up from all of you. All you got to do in return, and it really helps. It helps more than you know, is hit the subscribe button so we can keep these videos going for you beautiful people. Now, that wide receiver I want to talk about is Zay Flowers, who's coming off of a stinker in week 7. So yeah, technically you're selling low on him, but I think based on his overall season production, it's not the case. Like, he had 1 catch for 11 yards. In a game where the Ravens put up like over 40 points against a bad Tampa Bay defense, it was pretty crappy to see him have just 1 catch, 1 carry, and 4 fantasy points for you. You saw Rashad Bateman go off. You saw Mark Andrews score multiple times. He's going off, right? Derrick Henry's going off. Where was Zay Flowers? Well, even though he had the bad game, I think kind of his stretch of games where he was the wide receiver 11, where you scroll down coming into this game, he was the wide receiver 14 and wide receiver 6 off of 2 really good performances and good matchups, over 100 yards in each of those games. I think he still holds some value for you, but what we saw in week 7 was kind of the concern I had coming into the season for Zay Flowers as like a 5th round fantasy pick. And my concern was that he's on a team where he might be the 4th option in the offense. My bet was that Derrick Henry was going to be the number 1 option. I think that's holding out. The number 2 option was going to be Lamar Jackson with his legs and playing off of Derrick Henry in the run game. I kind of think that's what we're seeing right now. And then I believed, at least heading into the season, that Mark Andrews would be the number 3 option. Obviously, that didn't start too hot this year. Mark Andrews was pretty atrocious to begin this season. But if you look over the last 3 games, 3 productive games, back-to-back games at least 15 fantasy points. Over the last 2 games alone, he's averaging more fantasy points per game than Zay Flowers. But on the overall season, we still have to give it to Zay Flowers. But in general, still, this offense is built to run the ball and not throw 30-plus times a game. So my concern is that as a team, the Ravens are too good. They're too good on offense. They're good enough on defense right now, especially against running games, to just be in a situation that they're going to be up a lot of weeks, which means they don't have to be forced to pass like they have been in like week 1, you can say, against the Chiefs, where they drop back a lot more. Like, look at these upcoming matchups. Against the Browns, I'm not worried about that. Against the Broncos at home, not worried about that. The Steelers in a couple weeks, not worried about them having to throw the ball to stay up in these game scripts. Like, there's a lot of game scripts here to where you can see Lamar only throw 25 to 30 times, and now you're getting better performances from guys like Rashad Bateman, Andrews getting more involved. It's not as clear and cut that Flowers is like the alpha 10 target a game guy. So I would consider myself pretty high on Zay Flowers. He's my number 47 overall player, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't try and sell him for a better player. We redrafted today. He's a late 4th, early 5th round pick for me, but I think you could probably get a package deal done now for Marvin Harrison. Heck, if you can get one done for Brian Robinson, I love that. Get a package deal done for Josh Jacobs, I love that. These are the types of players I'd be trading in deals right now for Zay Flowers, who I think a lot of people associate him with an awesome Ravens team, awesome Ravens offense. Lamar Jackson, MVP right now, yet again. I think now's the time to sell him. And here's just your weekly reminder to sell Kareem Hunt. And I know it might seem crazy that I keep saying this, because look what Kareem Hunt just did. 22 fantasy points, was a top 10 running back. But let's break down into this. 22 carries, he's doing it on volume. 78 rushing yards, he's averaging 3.5 yards per carry. On the season right now, it's now 3.9 yards per carry, 44th in the NFL. If you actually watch these games of Kareem Hunt, he doesn't look explosive. He doesn't look great. They just trust him enough, because Carson Steele keeps fumbling, to at least go out there and get 3 to 4 yards per carry. And it's worked out so far for you in fantasy, because in his last 2 games, the game before the bye week, he scored a touchdown. touchdown. He had a bunch of carries in that game. Let's go over to his touches here. Oh, 27 carries. He had a reception in that game, so 28 touches, and he barely gets 117 yards, averaging 3 yards per touch. Okay, that's fine on the ground. He gets you a top 5 finish because of the volume. Get you a top 11 finish because of the volume. This is now back-to-back games where he's seen a lot of volume, and touchdowns have helped him get there. But he's not been a threat in the pass-catching game. He's not been a threat for explosive runs, and that's going to change in a couple of weeks, and you're not going to get this much value out of Kareem Hunt. Because in a couple of weeks, we get Isaiah Pacheco back, and it could be as soon as 1 to 2 weeks. And I don't think Pacheco really maybe ever at any point this season is going to see his full 80% workload, but even if it's a split backfield, that's enough to take away some of the upside from Kareem Hunt. If Kareem Hunt only goes down now to 10 carries and he's averaging 3 to 4 yards per touch and he's not finding the end zone because Pacheco's the red zone back, now you got a guy on your team who's getting you 4 to 5 fantasy points. Now don't get me wrong, this week's matchup as a 10-point road favorite against the Raiders, who are bottom 5 rush defense, is another great spot for Kareem Hunt. I'm expecting yet again this week 15 to 20 touches, a touchdown, 16 to 20 fantasy points, and that's all well and good. After this week is the time to finally sell Kareem Hunt because Pacheco could be back as soon as like week 9. So these are the players that you should be trading away before week 8 begins. And if you want to see some more players that you can trade for them, well, we have our running back trade targets here and our wide receiver trade target video right here popping up. Could be your favorite video ever, one of those. So be sure to check them both out, right? Why not? And I'll see you all in the next one.